Rachel Chen was having one of those mornings where everything seemed to go wrong at once. You know the kind, where you wake up late, can't find your keys, and the coffee maker decides today is the day it stops working. She'd slept through her alarm, which almost never happened, but the truth was she'd been up until 2 in the morning going through bills at her kitchen table. At 34 years old, Rachel worked as a nurse at the city hospital. It was the kind of job that demanded everything from you. Long shifts, emotional exhaustion, and somehow never enough pay to match the pressure. She loved it, though. There was something about helping people on their worst days that made her feel like she was doing something that mattered. But lately, life had been testing her in ways she hadn't expected. 3 months ago, her mother had fallen and broken her hip. The recovery was slow, and her mom needed help with almost everything. Rachel had moved back into her childhood home to take care of her, which meant an extra 40 minutes of commute time each way. Her mother's insurance didn't cover everything, and the medical bills had started piling up on the kitchen counter like unwanted mail. Rachel had taken on extra shifts when she could, but there were only so many hours in a day. This particular Tuesday morning felt especially heavy. Her phone had been buzzing since 6 in the morning with payment reminders. The rent was due. Her mother's medication needed refilling. The car was making a weird noise that she couldn't afford to get checked out. And to top it all off, she'd gotten a notice that her credit card payment was overdue. Rachel grabbed her brown leather purse, the one her grandmother had given her years ago, and rushed out the door. Her mother was still sleeping, which was a small mercy. At least she wouldn't have to explain why she was leaving in such a panic. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and she could see it pulling up just as she turned the corner. "Wait," she called out, waving her hand as she ran. The bus driver thankfully saw her and waited those precious extra seconds. Rachel climbed aboard, breathless and flustered, digging through her purse for her transit pass. Her hands were shaking slightly, partly from the running, partly from the stress that had become her constant companion lately. She found a seat near the back and tried to catch her breath. The bus was crowded with the usual morning commuters. Everyone looked half asleep, staring at their phones or out the windows with blank expressions. Rachel pulled out her own phone and scrolled through her banking app, even though she knew it would just make her feel worse. The numbers stared back at her, unforgiving. $200 left until payday, and that was supposed to cover groceries, gas, and her mother's prescription refill. She closed the app and looked out the window instead, watching the city pass by in a blur of gray buildings and early morning traffic. Sometimes she wondered how it had all gotten so hard. Just a few years ago, things had felt manageable. She'd had a small apartment, a little savings account, even plans for a vacation. Now she was back in her childhood bedroom, counting pennies and hoping nothing else would break. The bus reached the downtown station, and Rachel joined the crowd of people pouring out onto the platform. The train station was always chaotic at this hour. Hundreds of people rushing in different directions, the screech of arriving trains, announcements echoing through loudspeakers that no one could quite understand. Rachel had made this commute so many times she could do it with her eyes closed. But today her mind was somewhere else entirely. She thought about the conversation she'd had with her mother the night before. Her mom had been apologizing again, saying she felt like a burden, that she hated Rachel having to take care of her like this. Rachel had tried to reassure her, told her it was fine, that family takes care of family. But the truth was more complicated than that. She loved her mother, of course she did. But the weight of it all was crushing sometimes. Her phone buzzed again. Another reminder. Another bill. Rachel silenced it and shoved it back in her pocket as she walked toward the platform for the 8:15 train. She could see it approaching in the distance, the headlights cutting through the dim morning light of the underground station. The platform was packed. People jostled for position, everyone trying to be first through the doors so they could grab a seat. Rachel positioned herself near where the doors would open, her purse slung over her shoulder. Inside that purse was everything she needed: her wallet with her ID and credit cards, her house keys, the cash she'd withdrawn yesterday for groceries and her mother's medication, and most importantly, a small photograph of her grandmother that she'd kept since the funeral 5 years ago. That photograph was one of her most treasured possessions. Her grandmother had basically raised her when Rachel's parents were going through their divorce. She'd been the one who encouraged Rachel to become a nurse, who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. The photo showed her grandmother in her garden, wearing her favorite sun hat and smiling at the camera. Rachel looked at it whenever she felt overwhelmed, as a reminder that she came from strong women who didn't give up. The train pulled into the station with a rush of air and the high-pitched squeal of brakes. The doors slid open and the crowd surged forward. Rachel moved with them, her mind still tangled up in worries about money and medications and everything she needed to do that day. She reached up to adjust her purse strap as she stepped toward the train. That's when it happened. In the chaos of bodies pushing forward, someone bumped into her from behind. Rachel stumbled slightly, catching herself, and in that moment her purse slipped from her shoulder. She felt it slide down her arm but didn't process what was happening quickly enough. The purse hit the concrete platform with a soft thud, but the noise was swallowed by the sound of hundreds of footsteps and the train's engine. Rachel stepped onto the train, moving with the flow of people, her mind already racing ahead to her shift at the hospital. She found a spot to stand, holding onto the pole as more passengers squeezed in around her. The doors chimed their warning and began to slide closed. It wasn't until the train lurched forward and started moving through the dark tunnel that Rachel reached down for her purse out of habit. Her hand met empty air. She looked down at her shoulder. Nothing. A cold wave of panic washed over her. The purse was gone. Her heart started racing as she frantically looked around her feet, hoping it had just fallen to the floor of the train. But there was nothing there. She patted her coat pockets, checked the floor again, asked the person next to her if they'd seen a brown leather purse. They shook their head, already looking away, lost in their own morning routine. Rachel's mind went into overdrive. The platform. It must have fallen on the platform. But the train was already speeding away, the station disappearing behind them in the darkness. There was no going back now. She wouldn't be at that station again until the end of her shift, and by then it would be long gone. In a city this size, with thousands of people passing through that station every hour, an abandoned purse wouldn't last 5 minutes. Rachel stood frozen on the moving train, her hand still hovering in the empty space where her purse should have been. Around her, people swayed with the motion of the train, completely absorbed in their own worlds. Nobody noticed the woman in the nurse's scrubs whose entire life had just fallen onto a subway platform. Her first instinct was to get off at the next stop and go back. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was pointless. By the time she backtracked, the purse would be gone. Someone would have taken it, or security would have picked it up, or it would have been kicked aside and trampled by the endless stream of commuters. Still, her mind clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, it would be sitting there waiting for her. The train pulled into the next station and Rachel pushed her way through the crowd, mumbling apologies as she squeezed past annoyed passengers. She stood on the platform, breathing hard, trying to think clearly. Going back would make her over an hour late for her shift. She was already on thin ice with her supervisor after having to call in sick twice last month when her mother had doctor's appointments. She pulled out her phone. Thank God it had been in her coat pocket and not her purse. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock it. She pulled up the Transit Authority's website and found the number for Lost and Found. The phone rang 6 times before someone answered. Transit Authority, Lost and Found, this is David speaking. Hi, yes, I just lost my purse at the downtown station about 10 minutes ago, Rachel said, the words tumbling out fast. It's a brown leather purse, kind of worn. It fell on the platform when I was getting on the train. Okay, ma'am, I'll file a report. Can you describe the contents? Rachel's throat tightened as she listed everything. Her wallet with her driver's license, her credit cards, her hospital ID badge, her house keys, the $200 in cash, a week's worth of grocery money and her mother's medication money, and the photograph of her grandmother. If someone turns it in, we'll contact you, David said in a tone that suggested he'd given this speech 1,000 times before. But I have to be honest with you, ma'am. Most lost items don't get returned. You should probably cancel your credit cards and file a police report. Rachel thanked him and hung up, feeling the weight of those words settle over her. Most lost items don't get returned. Of course they didn't. She'd lived in this city long enough to know better than to expect miracles. She got back on the next train heading to work, but this time she barely noticed the other passengers. Her mind was racing through everything she needed to do. Cancel the credit cards, file a police report, figure out how to get into her apartment without keys, replace her ID, and somehow come up with another $200 that she absolutely did not have. The hospital was a blur when she arrived. Rachel went through the motions of checking in, changing into her work shoes and starting her rounds. But her mind was elsewhere. Between checking on patients, she made phone calls. She called her credit card companies and sat on hold for what felt like hours, waiting to cancel cards she could barely afford to use anyway. She filed an online police report, knowing it was just a formality. She called a locksmith and nearly choked when they quoted her $300 to change her locks. "I don't need the locks changed," she'd said. "I just need to get in." "We can do a basic unlock for $85, the locksmith said. $85 she didn't have. Rachel hung up and pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. Her colleague Jennifer found her in the break room during lunch. Jennifer was one of those perpetually cheerful people who always seemed to have their life together. She took one look at Rachel's face and sat down beside her. "What's wrong?" Rachel explained what had happened, and as she talked, the reality of it all hit her harder. It wasn't just about the money or the inconvenience. That photograph of her grandmother was gone. The last physical piece of her that Rachel carried everywhere. The thought of it sitting in a trash can somewhere, or in the pocket of a stranger who wouldn't know what it meant, made her chest ache. Jennifer offered to lend her some money, but Rachel shook her head. She was already drowning in bills and obligations. She couldn't add debt to a friend on top of everything else. The rest of her shift passed in a fog. Rachel went through the motions, checking vitals, administering medications, updating charts. She smiled at patients and answered their questions, all while a quiet panic hummed beneath the surface of everything she did. How was she going to buy groceries this week? How was she going to get her mother's heart medication refilled? The prescription was due tomorrow and it cost $140 even with insurance. At 6 o'clock, her shift finally ended. Rachel changed back into her street clothes and stood outside the hospital, dreading what came next. She had to go home, but she couldn't get in. Her phone showed a text from her mother asking what time she'd be back. Rachel's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She took the train back downtown, back to the station where she'd lost everything that morning. She knew it was stupid, but she had to look, had to see for herself that the purse was really gone. The platform was quieter now, the evening rush still an hour away. Rachel walked slowly along the spot where she'd been standing that morning. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. Just discarded coffee cups and a forgotten newspaper, the usual debris of a busy station. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the concrete as if she could will her purse to materialize. A train came and went. Then another. People flowed around her like water around a stone. Finally, Rachel made herself leave. She took the train to her stop and walked the 3 blocks to her mother's house. Her house now, she supposed. When she got to the front door, she just stood there, staring at the lock she couldn't open. She rang the doorbell and waited. Feeling like a complete failure, her mother answered, confusion crossing her face when she saw Rachel standing outside. "Honey, did you forget your keys?" "I lost my purse, Mom," Rachel said, and hearing herself say it out loud finally broke something inside her. "I lost everything." Her mother pulled her inside and wrapped her arms around her, and Rachel let herself cry for the first time all day. All the stress and fear and exhaustion came pouring out. She cried about the purse and the money and the keys, but mostly she cried about that photograph, about losing the one thing she couldn't replace. "It's okay, sweetheart," her mother murmured, rubbing her back the way she used to when Rachel was a child. "It's just stuff. We'll figure it out," but it wasn't just stuff. It was her grandmother's face smiling up from that garden. It was proof that good things had existed in her life, that she came from somewhere warm and loving even when everything felt cold and impossible. Rachel pulled away and wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. Her mother was the one who was supposed to be taken care of, not the other way around. She couldn't fall apart like this. "I'm sorry," Rachel said. "It's been a long day." "Stop apologizing," her mother said firmly. "Come on, I made soup. You need to eat something." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Rachel had been sorting through bills just the night before. Her mother ladled soup into bowls and didn't ask questions, which Rachel appreciated. She didn't have the energy to go through the whole story again. After dinner, Rachel sat on her childhood bed and stared at her phone. She needed to figure out how to get money for the locksmith, for new keys, for groceries, for her mother's medication, but her mind felt empty, scraped clean by the day's disasters. She thought about her grandmother, about what she would have said in this moment. Probably something practical and kind, something about how problems that seem impossible at night look smaller in the morning. But her grandmother had never had to choose between changing locks and buying medication. Or maybe she had, and Rachel just hadn't known about it. The next morning, Rachel woke up early and called in a favor from a neighbor who had a spare key to the house. At least that was one problem solved. But the others remained, sitting heavy on her chest as she got ready for another shift at the hospital. She told herself that the purse was gone, that she needed to accept it and move on, that holding on to hope would only make it hurt worse when nothing came of it. But late at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, she couldn't help but imagine someone finding it. Someone honest enough to look inside, see her address, and send it back. She knew it was foolish. Knew the chances were basically zero. Still, she hoped anyway. 2 days had passed since Rachel lost her purse, and she'd almost convinced herself to stop thinking about it. Almost. She'd managed to scrape together enough money to get a locksmith to make her a new set of keys. A friend from work had lent her $60 for groceries, which Rachel had promised to pay back on her next paycheck. Her mother's medication had been the biggest challenge. She'd finally called the doctor's office and begged them to give her a payment plan. They'd agreed, but the humiliation of having to ask still stung. The worst part was the photograph. Rachel kept reaching for her purse to look at it, forgetting for just a second that it was gone. Each time she remembered, it felt like a small punch to the stomach. She'd looked through old family albums, hoping to find another copy of that picture, but there wasn't one. It had been a candid shot, taken on some random afternoon that nobody had thought to document twice. Thursday afternoon, Rachel had just gotten home from a morning shift. Her mother was napping in her room and the house was quiet. Rachel had changed out of her scrubs and was making herself a sandwich when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief paranoid moment, she wondered if it was someone coming to collect on a bill she'd forgotten about. But when she opened the door, there was just a delivery driver standing there with a clipboard and a package. "Rachel Chen?" the driver asked. "Yes? Got a delivery for you. Need you to sign here." Rachel signed, confused. She hadn't ordered anything. Couldn't afford to order anything. The driver handed her a medium-sized package wrapped in brown paper and left without another word. Rachel closed the door and looked at the package. Her name and address were written in neat handwriting on the front, but there was no return address. No shipping label from any company, just her information and a stamp from the local post office. She set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a moment, trying to think of what it could be. Maybe something her mother had ordered? But her mom barely knew how to use a computer, let alone shop online. Rachel carefully tore open the paper, and her heart stopped. It was her purse. The brown leather was unmistakable, worn smooth in all the familiar places. Rachel picked it up with shaking hands, almost afraid it would disappear if she held it too tight. She opened it slowly, barely breathing. Everything was inside. Her wallet sat in its usual spot, and when she opened it, all her cards were there. Her driver's license, her credit cards, the ones she'd already canceled and would now have to call and explain. Her hospital ID badge was tucked in the side pocket. Her keys were attached to the small clip inside, and the cash. Rachel pulled out the bills and counted them with trembling fingers. All $200, exactly as she'd left it. She reached into the zippered compartment where she always kept the photograph, almost too scared to look. But there it was, her grandmother's smile, her sun hat, the garden in the background. Rachel pressed the photo to her chest and felt tears start to fall. She hadn't even realized how tightly she'd been holding on to the grief of losing it. After a moment, she wiped her eyes and looked more carefully through the purse. That's when she noticed the piece of paper tucked into the front pocket. It was folded neatly, and when Rachel opened it, she saw handwriting on lined notebook. Paper, the same neat handwriting that had been on the package. She sat down at the kitchen table and read it. "Dear Rachel," it began. "I found your purse on the platform at the downtown station on Tuesday morning. I saw it fall when you were getting on the train, but by the time I picked it up, the doors had already closed and you were gone. I want you to know I didn't look through your personal things more than I needed to in order to find your address. I just wanted to get this back to you safely. I know what it's like to lose something important, and I couldn't imagine keeping what wasn't mine. I saw your hospital ID badge, so I know you're a nurse. I also saw the photograph of who I'm guessing is someone very special to you. She has a kind face. My own mother passed away 3 years ago, and I still carry her picture everywhere I go. I understand what it means to hold on to those pieces of people we love. My mother was a nurse for 37 years. She worked at Memorial Hospital before she retired. She used to come home exhausted every single day, but she never complained. She said nursing wasn't just a job. It was about showing up for people when they needed someone most. She taught me that good people deserve to have good things happen to them. I don't know what you're going through in your life right now. Maybe everything is great, maybe it's not. But I do know that nurses give so much of themselves to take care of others. And you deserve to have someone take care of you too, even in a small way like this. The world can feel really hard sometimes. Trust me, I know. But it can also be kind. And sometimes we get to be the ones who make it a little kinder for someone else. I hope this helps even just a little bit. I hope you know that there are still people out there who try to do the right thing. And I hope you keep doing the important work you do. Take care of yourself. A friend. Rachel read the note 3 times, her tears falling freely now. This wasn't the grateful kind of crying she'd done when she first saw the purse. This was something deeper, a release of all the pressure and fear and loneliness she'd been carrying. Someone she'd never met had gone out of their way to help her. They'd found her address, packaged up the purse carefully, paid for postage, and sent it back without asking for anything in return. They hadn't even left their name. Just called themselves a friend. And that note, those words about her grandmother's kind face, about understanding what it meant to hold on to pieces of the people we love. This stranger had seen her, really seen her, in a way that made her feel less alone in the world. Rachel thought about the past few days, how she'd felt so defeated and overwhelmed, how she'd been so focused on everything going wrong that she'd almost forgotten that anything could go right. This person, this friend, had reminded her that kindness still existed, even when it felt like the world was full of nothing but problems and bills and impossible choices. Her mother shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Honey, I thought I heard you crying. What's wrong?" Rachel looked up, still holding the note. "Nothing's wrong, Mom. Actually, something's really right." She showed her mother the purse, explained what had happened, and watched her mother's face light up with surprise and joy. They sat together at the table while her mother read the note, and when she finished, she had tears in her eyes too. "What a beautiful thing," her mother said softly. "You know, your grandmother used to say that the world gives back what you put into it. Maybe not always right away, and maybe not in the way you expect, but it comes back." Rachel thought about that. She thought about all the patients she'd cared for over the years, all the hands she'd held, all the times she'd stayed late to make sure someone felt safe and cared for. She'd never done it expecting anything in return. That wasn't why you became a nurse, but maybe her grandmother had been right. Maybe all that kindness she'd put out into the world had somehow found its way back to her, delivered by a stranger who understood what it meant to lose something precious. She looked at the photograph of her grandmother, safe in her hands again. And for the first time in weeks, Rachel felt something other than exhaustion and worry. She felt hopeful. She felt grateful. She felt like maybe things were going to be okay after all. That evening, Rachel put the note in her wallet right behind her driver's license, where she'd see it every day. She wanted to keep it close to remind herself of this moment whenever things got hard again. Before bed, she reread it one more time, paying special attention to the line about the world being kind. She thought about the person who'd written it, wondered who they were, what their life was like, whether they knew how much this had meant to her. She wanted to thank them, but there was no way to do that. No return address, no name, no way to track them down. Just the knowledge that somewhere in this big city, there was someone who'd chosen compassion over convenience. Rachel decided that maybe the best way to say thank you was to do what the note suggested, to pay it forward. To be the person who chose kindness when given the chance. To remember that even small acts of goodness could change someone's entire day or week, or maybe even their whole outlook on life. She fell asleep that night with the purse on her nightstand right where she could see it. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't lie awake worrying about all the things that could go wrong. Instead, she thought about all the things that might go right. Rachel kept the note in her wallet, tucked right behind her hospital ID where she'd see it every time she needed to badge into work. And she read it often, sometimes multiple times a day, whenever she felt that familiar weight of exhaustion and stress starting to settle back over her shoulders. Something had shifted inside her since getting the purse back. It wasn't that her problems had disappeared. The bills were still there, her mother still needed care, and her paycheck still stretched too thin. But the way she looked at the world had changed somehow. That stranger's act of kindness had cracked open something in her that she hadn't realized had closed. The first time she noticed it was 3 days after receiving the purse. Rachel was on her lunch break, standing in line at the hospital cafeteria. The line was long and everyone looked tired and impatient. In front of her stood a young resident doctor she recognized from the 4th floor. He couldn't have been more than 26 or 27, and he looked absolutely exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from pulling double shifts and running on nothing but coffee and determination. He ordered a sandwich and a coffee, then reached for his wallet. Rachel watched as his face fell. He patted his pockets, checked his white coat, searched through his bag. Nothing. "I'm so sorry," he said to the cashier, his ears turning red. "I must have left my wallet in my locker. I can come back." "Just step aside," the cashier said, not unkindly but with the briskness of someone who had 100 more people to serve. "Next in line." The young doctor moved away, embarrassed, and Rachel found herself stepping forward before she could think about it. "Wait," she said. "I've got it." At his order to mine, the doctor turned to her, surprised. "No, that's okay. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Rachel said, pulling out her debit card. "But I want to. We've all forgotten our wallets before." She paid for both orders and handed the resident his sandwich and coffee. He looked at her like she'd just given him $100 instead of a $12 lunch. "Thank you so much," he said. "Really. I'm on hour 32 of a shift and I'm completely running on empty. This means a lot." "Just pay it forward when you can," Rachel said. And as the words left her mouth, she realized she was echoing the sentiment from the note. "And maybe go home and get some sleep eventually." He laughed, a surprised and genuine sound. "I'll try. Thank you again." Rachel walked back to her break room with her own lunch, and she felt lighter somehow. That small interaction, probably something she would have walked past a week ago, too wrapped up in her own problems to notice, had made her feel more like herself than she had in months. That evening, she was taking the bus home when she noticed an elderly man struggling with his bags. He was trying to get off at his stop, but he had a walker and 2 full grocery bags, and the bus driver was already getting impatient. Rachel stood up. "Here, let me help you." She carried his bags down the steps while he maneuvered his walker, and then she walked with him half a block to his building, even though her stop was still 2 blocks away. She'd have to walk back, but it didn't matter. "You're very kind," the old man said when they reached his door. "My daughter usually helps me, but she's working late tonight." "It's no problem at all," Rachel said. "Take care of yourself." She walked the extra blocks back to her bus stop with a strange warmth in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had after helping the resident doctor. Like she was remembering who she was underneath all the stress and exhaustion. The next day at work, Rachel was assigned to a particularly difficult patient, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. She was recovering from surgery and was miserable about it, taking out her frustration on anyone who came near her. The other nurses had started drawing straws to see who had to check on her. But when Rachel went into her room that afternoon, she didn't see a difficult patient. She saw someone who was scared and in pain and far from home. She saw her own mother, or maybe what her mother could be someday. Instead of rushing through the vitals check like she normally might have, Rachel sat down in the chair beside the bed. "How are you really doing?" she asked. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know the chart says your vitals are improving and you're on track for discharge. But how are you? This must be really hard." Something in the woman's face softened. "It's terrible," she admitted. "I hate being here. I hate feeling weak. I hate having to ask for help to go to the bathroom. My husband died last year and my kids live out of state, so I'm just here alone and Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I know I've been difficult." "You're not difficult," Rachel said gently. "You're going through something hard." That's allowed. They talked for 20 minutes. Rachel learned that Mrs. Patterson had been a teacher for 40 years, that she loved gardening but couldn't keep up with it anymore, that she was terrified of going home to an empty house where she might fall again. When Rachel finally had to leave to check on other patients, Mrs. Patterson caught her hand. "Thank you for listening," she said. "You're the first person who's asked me how I'm really doing." The shift supervisor later pulled Rachel aside. "I don't know what you said to Mrs. Patterson, but she's been pleasant all afternoon." "Whatever it was, thank you. The whole floor's been dealing with her complaints." Rachel just smiled. She hadn't done anything special. She'd just remembered to see the person instead of just the patient. That's what the stranger who'd returned her purse had done. They'd seen her as a person, noticed the photograph of her grandmother, understood what it might mean to lose something precious. On her day off, Rachel took her mother to her doctor's appointment. Afterward, they stopped at a small cafe for lunch, a rare treat they couldn't really afford. But Rachel's mother had been cooped up in the house for weeks, and the note's message about kindness extended to being kind to the people you love too. They were sitting by the window when Rachel noticed their waitress. She was young, maybe 22, and she looked completely overwhelmed. The cafe was understaffed, and she was running between tables, apologizing for delays, clearly doing her best but falling behind. Rachel remembered what that felt like. She'd worked as a waitress all through nursing school, dealing with impatient customers and impossible shifts. When the waitress finally brought their check, she'd gotten one of the items wrong. "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes welling up. "I'll fix it right now. It's my second day and we're short 2 people and—" "Hey," Rachel said softly. "It's okay. The order is fine. We're not in a hurry." She left a tip that was probably more than their entire meal cost. It meant she'd have to skip her own lunch at work a few days next week, but watching the young woman's face light up when she saw it made it worth every penny. Her mother noticed. "That was generous of you," she said as they walked to the car. "Someone was generous to me," Rachel said, thinking of the stranger who'd spent money to mail her purse back. "I'm just passing it along." These moments started to add up. Rachel began noticing opportunities everywhere, holding the door for someone whose hands were full, giving directions to a lost tourist, letting someone who looked rushed go ahead of her in line. Small things mostly, nothing that would change the world. But she remembered what the note had said, that the world could be kind, that sometimes we get to be the ones who make it a little kinder for someone else. One afternoon, Rachel was leaving the hospital when she saw a man sitting on the curb outside, his head in his hands. He was wearing scrubs too, a nurse or maybe a tech. She almost walked past, but something made her stop. "Are you okay?" she asked. He looked up and she could see he'd been crying. "Just got some bad news," he said. "Family stuff. I'm fine, just needed a minute." Rachel sat down on the curb next to him, not saying anything, just being there. After a moment, he started talking. His mother had just been diagnosed with cancer. He didn't know how he was going to manage caring for her while working full-time. He didn't know if he could afford to take time off. Rachel understood all of it. She told him about her own mother, about the medical bills, about how impossible it all felt sometimes. She didn't have solutions for him, but she listened, and sometimes that was enough. "Thanks," he said eventually. "I just needed to tell someone who'd understand." "Anytime," Rachel said, and she meant it. Walking to her car that evening, Rachel pulled out her wallet to check if she had enough cash for gas. The note was there, creased from being folded and unfolded so many times. She read the line about nurses giving so much of themselves to take care of others. The stranger who'd written this had no idea what their kindness had started, how it had reminded Rachel of who she wanted to be, how it had made her start looking for ways to help instead of just trying to survive. She thought about all the small moments of the past week, the resident doctor, the elderly man with groceries, Mrs. Patterson, the overwhelmed waitress, the grieving colleague. None of them were grand gestures, but they mattered. She could see that now. The stranger had given her more than her purse back. They'd given her a reminder that even when life felt overwhelming, even when you barely had enough for yourself, you could still find ways to make someone else's day a little bit better. And somehow, in trying to make things better for others, Rachel had started to feel better herself. 6 months had passed since Rachel got her purse back, and life hadn't suddenly become easy. Her mother was still recovering, though she was getting stronger every week. The bills still came, and Rachel still had to stretch every paycheck to make it work. But something fundamental had changed in how she moved through the world. The note stayed in her wallet, the paper now soft and worn from being handled so many times. She'd read it on hard days when she needed reminding that goodness still existed. She'd read it on better days, too, as a way of keeping that feeling close. One Saturday afternoon, Rachel had just finished a grocery run. She was walking through the parking lot of the store, bags in both hands, when she saw a young woman standing beside a car with two small kids. The woman was patting her pockets frantically, and even from a distance, Rachel recognized that particular kind of panic. She walked over. "Everything okay?" The woman looked up and Rachel could see tears in her eyes. "I can't find my wallet. I just had it when I paid inside and now it's gone. I've got my kids and I don't have my keys. My phone is dead and She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth like she was trying to hold it together. "Okay, let's think about this," Rachel said, setting her groceries down. "Where were you before this?" "I went to the pharmacy next door first, then came here. I had the wallet at checkout. I'm sure of it. Let me help you look." They searched the car, checked under the seats, looked through the diaper bag. Nothing. The two kids were starting to get fussy in the back seat. Rachel could see the woman's composure cracking. "Stay here for a second," Rachel said. "I'll be right back." She walked quickly back into the grocery store and went straight to customer service. Sure enough, someone had turned in a wallet. The cashier had just logged it in. Rachel practically ran back to the parking lot. "Found it!" Someone turned it in at the service desk. The woman's face transformed. Oh my God, thank you." She opened the wallet and everything was there: cards, cash, driver's license, even family photos tucked into the sleeves. I was already thinking about how I'd have to call my husband to come get us, and he's at work 2 hours away, and we'd have to cancel the cards, and..." She stopped and looked at Rachel. "I'm sorry. You probably need to get going. Thank you so much for helping me." "Actually," Rachel said, "do you have a minute? There's something I want to show you." She pulled out her wallet and carefully removed the note. It was fragile now from being folded and unfolded hundreds of times, but the words were still clear. "6 months ago, I lost my purse at the train station," Rachel said. "I thought it was gone forever. But someone found it and sent it back to me with this note. Reading it changed something in me. It reminded me that even when things are really hard, there are still good people doing good things." The young woman read the note, her eyes filling with fresh tears. When she looked up, she said, "This is beautiful." "Who wrote it?" "I don't know. They never left their name. Just called themselves a friend. And that's kind of perfect, actually. Because it wasn't about them getting credit. It was just about helping someone who needed it." The woman read the note again, more slowly this time. "My daughter was just asking me the other day if there were still nice people in the world. She's 7. And she saw something mean happen at school and it upset her. I didn't really know what to tell her." She handed the note back carefully. "Now I do," Rachel smiled. "Tell her yes. Tell her there are still nice people everywhere. And tell her she can be one of them." They talked for a few more minutes. The woman's name was Lisa, and she was a teacher at an elementary school. She'd been having a rough week. One of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong at once. Finding her wallet, having a stranger help her, reading that note, it had shifted something for her too. Before they parted, "Tways," Lisa asked, "can I take a picture of that note? I'd like to share it with my daughter." "Of course," Rachel said. She watched Lisa drive away and thought about the stranger who'd written those words. They'd probably never know about this moment in a grocery store parking lot. Never know that their kindness had rippled out to touch someone else. Who would go home and tell her 7-year-old daughter that yes, there are still good people in the world. That evening, Rachel was having dinner with her mother when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jennifer, her colleague from the hospital. "You inspired me. Paid for the groceries for the person behind me in line today." The look on her face made my whole week. "Thank you for reminding me to look for chances to help." Rachel showed her mother the message. "That's nice," her mother said. "You've been different these past few months, you know." "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," Rachel admitted. "I was so focused on everything that was going wrong that I forgot to look for what was going right." That note, it was like permission to start seeing things differently. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother would be proud of you. She always said the best way to feel rich is to give what you have even when you don't have much." Rachel thought about that. She still didn't have much, not in terms of money, but she had the ability to buy a colleague lunch, to help someone find their wallet, to sit with someone who was grieving. Those things didn't cost much, but they mattered enormously to the people receiving them. A few weeks later, Rachel was at the train station, the same station where she'd lost her purse all those months ago. She was early for once, so she stood on the platform watching the crowds rush by. That's when she saw it. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, dropped his backpack as he ran for the train. The doors closed with him inside, and the backpack sat there on the concrete platform, people walking around it like it was invisible. Rachel picked it up. It was heavy with textbooks and notebooks. She looked inside and found a student ID from the local high school, a laptop and a wallet with $23 in it. Everything a student would need for school. She could have turned it in to the transit office like people had probably done with items she'd lost before. But she thought about the panic the kid was going to feel when he realized his backpack was gone, the worry about the laptop, the homework, the money. Rachel looked at the student ID and found his address. It wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes out of her way. She pulled out her phone and called the hospital to let them know she'd be a few minutes late. Then she took the backpack and got on the next train. When she knocked on the door at the address, a woman answered. Rachel explained what had happened, and the woman's face flooded with relief. "That's my son's bag. He called me in a panic from school." "Oh, thank God. Thank you so much for bringing it." "It's no problem," Rachel said. "I know what it's like to lose something important." She almost left then, but something made her pause. She pulled out a piece of paper from her own bag and wrote quickly. "Could you give this to your son?" she asked, handing it over along with the backpack. The woman looked confused but nodded. "Of course. Thank you again." Rachel walked back to the station thinking about what she'd written on that note. "Your backpack fell on the platform, but someone made sure you got it back. Everything's here, your laptop, your wallet, your schoolwork. I hope this reminds you that there are people looking out for you, even people you've never met. When you get a chance, pay it forward. Be someone's friend when they need one. The world needs more of that." She hadn't signed her name. Just like the person who'd returned her purse, she'd written "a friend" at the bottom. Standing on the platform waiting for her train, Rachel thought about the chain of kindness that had started with a stranger returning her purse. How it had changed her, how she'd changed others, how those people would go on to help someone else. That stranger probably thought they were just doing one nice thing for one person on one day. They had no idea that 6 months later, their words would be photographed in a parking lot, that they'd inspire a nurse to help a colleague, that they'd lead to a teenager getting his backpack back with a note of his own. The train pulled into the station and Rachel got on. She touched her wallet, feeling the outline of that original note through the leather. She'd probably carry it for the rest of her life, a reminder of the day someone chose to be kind when they didn't have to be. Life was still hard. Money was still tight. Her mother still needed care, and Rachel still worked too many hours for too little pay. But she'd learned something important. Even when you're struggling, even when you barely have enough for yourself, you can still make someone's day better. And somehow in making things better for others, you end up feeling better yourself. The world can be kind, and sometimes the best thing we can do is be the kindness we wish we'd see more of. Rachel smiled as the train carried her toward work, ready to show up for people who needed someone most. Just like her grandmother had taught her. Just like that stranger had reminded her. Just like she'd keep doing. One small act of kindness at a time.